Former child star Davey Chase became famous in the early 2000s for voicing Chihiro in Spirited Away and Lilo in Lilo and Stitch, while also terrifying audiences as Samara in The Ring. She quickly became one of Hollywood's most recognizable young actors, appearing in major films and television shows before largely disappearing from the spotlight. According to recent reports, she spent years struggling with personal problems, financial instability, and declining health. Friends claimed she became increasingly isolated, while reports alleged she'd been living in poverty and even spending time in Los Angeles' Skid Row area in the months before her death. Her boyfriend later said she'd been suffering from severe malnutrition before being hospitalized with meningitis and multiple serious blood infections. The actress reportedly weighed less than 80 pounds by the time she was hospitalized. The infections reportedly progressed to sepsis, causing multiple organ failure, and Chase died on June 16, 2026 at just 35 years old. This was the moment a jogger suddenly shoved the woman into the path of an oncoming double-decker bus and then kept running. Footage from London's Putney Bridge shows the woman being pushed directly into traffic just seconds before the bus reached her. Miraculously, the driver swerved just in time, missing her by inches and preventing what could have been a horrific death. The shocking footage sparked a massive manhunt, but despite clear video of the incident, police couldn't identify the runner. For years, the mystery remained unsolved as investigators searched tirelessly for the man responsible. Nearly a decade later, authorities finally tracked him down and revealed his identity: Nicholas Brandrum, a wealthy investment banker. He was soon arrested in 2025 and ultimately convicted of assault. This was the moment Dutch aerobatic pilot Noreen Melkomjohn came terrifyingly close to being ripped from her aircraft thousands of feet above the ground. During a high-speed aerobatic flight, the plane's canopy suddenly burst open and shattered, blasting her with hurricane-force wind and flying debris. The force was so intense that she temporarily lost vision in one eye and struggled to breathe, yet she somehow maintained control of the aircraft while continuing to perform emergency procedures. Despite the severe wind pressure and the constant risk of losing control, Noreen managed to safely land the plane and walked away alive from an incident that easily could have turned fatal within seconds. Billy Mays became one of the most recognizable faces on television through his high-energy infomercials for products like OxyClean and Mighty Putty. But in June of 2009, just days after the shocking death of Michael Jackson, Mays was found dead in his Florida home at age 50, adding to a string of high-profile celebrity deaths that dominated headlines that week. Initial reports suggested a rough airplane landing the day before may have caused a fatal head injury, but an autopsy later found severe heart disease to be the primary cause of death, with cocaine listed as a contributing factor. His sudden death marked the end of one of television's most recognizable faces and voices. During Liberia's brutal civil wars from 1989 to 2003, many fighters believed ritual magic could make them bulletproof and marched into battle wearing wedding dresses, wigs, fairy wings, Halloween masks, and other bizarre costumes. Some commanders even performed rituals involving animal sacrifices, charms, and amulets they thought would protect their troops from gunfire. The superstition, of course, offered no real protection, and thousands of combatants, many of them child soldiers, were killed, mutilated, or left traumatized as the conflict claimed an estimated 250,000 lives, displaced more than 1 million people, and left the country devastated for years. College student Daniel Chong was detained during a DEA raid on a suspected drug house in San Diego, even though agents later concluded he wasn't involved in the investigation and planned to release him. Instead, he was accidentally locked in a holding cell for nearly 5 days without any food, water, or a toilet. Chong later said he spent days screaming, kicking the door, and banging the walls for help, while hearing footsteps, voices, and other cell doors opening and closing nearby, raising questions about how nobody responded in all that time. As dehydration and starvation set in, he had no choice but to drink his own urine to survive, began hallucinating, and used a shard of broken eyeglasses to carve the words "Sorry Mom" into his arm after becoming convinced he was gonna die. By the time agents finally found him, he was suffering from kidney failure, severe dehydration, and other life-threatening complications before eventually receiving a $4.1 million settlement from the DEA. During an extreme heat wave in India, temperatures became so intense that the asphalt on this road began to soften and melt. As the surface warped under the heat, the painted crosswalk lines twisted and stretched into bizarre wave-like patterns, creating a scene that looks more like a glitch than a real-life photograph. Photographer Martin LeMay captured this awesome image in England after a weasel leaped onto a woodpecker mid-flight and took a ride on the bird's back. The startled woodpecker eventually escaped after managing to land. Here are some rare photos of the silky anteater, the smallest anteater species on Earth. Found high in the rainforests of Central and South America, they spend nearly their entire lives hidden in the canopy feeding on ants. Their secretive lifestyle and perfect camouflage makes them one of the most difficult rainforest mammals to find, and surprisingly little is known about their behavior in the wild. Is that what I think it is? An incredibly rare, ultra premium, highly coveted Matsusaka sirloin steak. This is the last known photograph of a quagga, a zebra-like animal that once roamed southern Africa. Unlike modern zebras, quaggas only had stripes on the front half of their bodies, while the rest of their coats were mostly brown. European settlers hunted them heavily throughout the 1800s for their meat and hides, while farmers also killed them to reduce competition with livestock. The final wild quagga is believed to have been shot in the late 1870s, and the last known individual died in captivity at Amsterdam's Artis Zoo in 1883. No one even realized the species had gone extinct until long after the last quagga was dead. It's been over a week since the tragic death of Oliver Tree, so here's everything we know so far. On June 14th, the 32-year-old singer was killed when two helicopters collided over Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, killing all 6 people on board. One of the helicopters crashed into a car dealership and burst into flames, setting multiple vehicles on fire. One of the most disturbing details came from a witness who said he saw a passenger jump from one of the helicopters after the collision but before it struck the ground. Authorities never confirmed who that person was, but if the account is accurate, it means at least one victim may have been aware of what was happening in the final moments before the crash. The accident was reportedly so severe that Oliver Tree was left unrecognizable, with authorities forced to rely on dental records because of the condition of his remains after the fire. Among the other victims were Argentine YouTuber Gatsby, music producer Lucas Froda, director Lucas Vignali, and both pilots. In a chilling twist, another producer who was reportedly supposed to be on the flight backed out last minute because he was afraid of flying. More than a week later, investigators still haven't determined exactly what caused the collision. Authorities are reviewing flight records, radio communications, radar data, and the movement of both helicopters in the moments before impact. While some reports have suggested possible human error, investigators have not released an official cause and have warned that the investigation could take years to complete. This uncertainty has fueled widespread speculation about what actually happened. In a recent interview, the father of Argentine YouTuber Gatsby, one of the victims alongside Oliver Tree, said he personally believes the crash was an attack rather than an accident. He didn't provide evidence for this claim, and authorities have not indicated foul play was involved. However, the comments have resonated with many people online, where theories continue to circulate that there may have been something more going on than a simple aviation accident. For now, investigators have not found evidence supporting these claims, but until an official cause is released, the questions surrounding the crash are likely to continue. Since the crash, Oliver's remains have been returned to California, and his family has begun carrying out one of his final wishes. Rather than leaving his wealth to relatives, he wanted to use it to support artists through a foundation called Dr. Oliver Tree's extremely epic grant for baby geniuses, which is now being created in his honor. Here's some incredible footage of something you never see after a major sporting event. Thousands of fans voluntarily staying behind to clean the stadium. These spectators had just finished watching Japan play, but instead of heading for the exits, many remained in the stands collecting trash and wiping down their sections. The tradition is deeply rooted in Japanese culture, where cleaning shared spaces is often viewed as a basic responsibility and a sign of respect for others. In Japan, many students even help clean their own schools instead of relying on janitors. The result is scenes like this, where entire sections of a packed stadium are left looking almost untouched long after the final whistle. Here's a rare look at one of the most elusive underwater creatures on Earth. Captured more than 5,000 feet beneath the ocean's surface near an offshore oil rig, this giant deep staria jellyfish looks less like a real animal and more like something straight out of a horror movie. Its enormous translucent body and dark ghostly appearance have led many people to compare it to a Dementor from Harry Potter. Unlike most jellyfish, Deep Staria lacks long tentacles and instead uses its massive bell as a living net, wrapping itself around prey in the darkness of the deep sea. Because they inhabit some of the most inaccessible regions of the ocean, sightings are extremely rare, and scientists still know surprisingly little about how these mysterious animals live and reproduce. In honor of the World Cup, here are some morbid facts about soccer. In 2014, an Indian soccer player named Peter Biaksangzula died after scoring a goal. He was trying to celebrate the goal with a somersault but landed awkwardly on his head, dying in the hospital a few hours later. In 2013, Richard Swanson set out to dribble a soccer ball nearly 10,000 miles from Seattle to Brazil to raise money for charity ahead of the World Cup. But just 270 miles into the journey, he was struck and killed by a pickup truck on an Oregon highway, tragically ending the trek less than 2 weeks after it began. The driver was later tried twice for negligent homicide but was ultimately acquitted. During a 1998 soccer match in the Republic of Congo, a lightning bolt struck one of the goal pitches. It killed all 11 members of the home team, who were all wearing metal spikes. The other team was left completely unscathed, for they'd all been wearing rubber cleats. In 1989, 96 people were killed during a soccer match at Hillsborough Stadium in England after they were crushed due to overcrowding, many of whom died while standing up. 22 years later, Stephen Whittle became the 97th victim. Just before the game, he'd sold his ticket to a friend who died during the disaster. Still unable to cope with the guilt decades later, he took his own life in a horrific way in 2011. This was the World Cup goal that would ultimately cost Andres Escobar his life. During Colombia's 1994 World Cup match against the United States, Escobar accidentally deflected a cross into his own net, helping knock Colombia out of the tournament. The loss completely stunned the country, which had entered the World Cup with enormous expectations after a dominant qualifying campaign. Just 10 days after the loss, following a night out in Medellin, Colombia, Escobar was confronted by several men in a parking lot who reportedly mocked him over the own goal before shooting him 6 times. Witnesses later claimed the gunman yelled "goal" after each shot. Investigators believe the killing was linked to powerful criminal figures and gambling syndicates that had lost massive amounts of money on Colombia's elimination. Escobar reportedly tried to defuse the confrontation before the attack, telling the men that, quote, "life doesn't end here." Minutes later, he was dead at just 27 years old. The shooter was quickly identified, convicted, and sentenced to 43 years in prison, but was released after only serving about 11 years, while questions about who truly ordered the killing remain unanswered to this day. Former fitness model Lonnie Willison once appeared on magazine covers and lived a glamorous Hollywood lifestyle while she was married to former Baywatch actor Jeremy Jackson. But after her turbulent marriage with him ended, she reportedly struggled with severe mental illness, addiction, and financial collapse, eventually losing her job, apartment, and car before becoming homeless in Los Angeles. She's since been photographed searching through dumpsters for food and pushing all her belongings in a shopping cart. Wilson has said she deliberately keeps herself dirty and foul-smelling because she believes it makes her less likely to be assaulted while sleeping on the streets. Despite repeated offers of housing, rehab, and financial help from friends, she's consistently refused assistance, saying she prefers to live independently. In 1995, Mr. T was diagnosed with T-cell lymphoma. True to his larger-than-life personality, his first reaction was to joke, "Can you imagine that? Cancer with my name on it. Personalized cancer." After undergoing years of chemotherapy and radiation, he beat the disease and has remained cancer-free ever since. In 1976, a camper near the Gaines Rock Pit in the Florida Keys was approached by a hippie-looking stranger who offered to show him a human skeleton for 25 cents. After seeing the partially decomposed remains, the camper immediately contacted authorities. The victim was eventually identified as 15-year-old Stephanie Sempel, who had disappeared months earlier after hitchhiking to the Florida Keys. Nearly 50 years later, Stephanie's murder still remains unsolved. During the recent earthquakes in Venezuela, security cameras captured a terrifying race against time. Several people can be seen sprinting down the final flights of stairs as the building starts shaking violently. Seconds later, the entire structure starts collapsing behind them, reducing it to a massive pile of rubble as they escaped by mere moments. The powerful earthquakes caused widespread devastation across the country, destroying thousands of buildings and leaving more than 1,000 people dead, with many more displaced or injured. This was the moment a man was in serious danger of becoming a polar bear's next meal. After spotting the massive predator charging toward him, he sprinted for his snowmobile as the bear rapidly closed the distance. Just as he managed to start the engine, the roar of the snowmobile made the bear hesitate for just a split second. That brief pause gave him just enough time to speed away to safety. Polar bears are the only bears known to actively stalk and hunt humans as prey, making encounters like this among the most dangerous in the animal kingdom. While filming the 2011 sci-fi western Cowboys and Aliens, Olivia Wilde was very nearly killed during a horseback charge scene. After her horse unexpectedly jumped a 6-foot ditch and threw her to the ground, she landed directly in the path of around 40 galloping horses. Unable to move and convinced she was about to be trampled to death, Wilde later said she was waiting to be turned into pulverized applesauce. Thankfully, co-star Walton Goggins made a split-second decision to turn his horse sideways in front of her, shielding her body and forcing the stampede to split around them. Wilde has said she owes Goggins her life and calls him a real-life hero. In 2010, 24-year-old Emily Jaumain accidentally pricked herself with contaminated forceps while cleaning equipment used to study prion-infected mouse brains. For the next 7 years, she appeared completely healthy, before suddenly developing excruciating nerve pain, anxiety, hallucination, and rapidly worsening neurological decline. Doctors determined the lab accident had given her a fatal prion disease, an incurable brain disorder that slowly destroys the nervous system. Within months of her first symptoms, she died in 2019 at just 31 years old. Her death led to renewed scrutiny of lab safety protocols when handling prion. Best known for playing Xander Harris on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Nicholas Brendon spent years battling alcoholism, addiction, and repeated legal troubles. Over the next decade, he was arrested multiple times on charges including vandalism, theft, prescription fraud, and domestic violence, and publicly admitted to multiple suicide attempts while discussing his struggles on Dr. Phil. In 2021, severe spinal problems left him temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, and he later suffered a heart attack caused by a congenital heart defect. Brendan died from cardiovascular disease in his sleep in 2026 at just 54 years old. In 2003, 46-year-old pizza delivery driver Brian Wells robbed a bank in Pennsylvania while wearing a metal collar bomb locked around his neck, telling police he was forced to do it. Minutes after officers detained him, the bomb exploded before it could be safely removed, killing him instantly on live television. Investigators later concluded that Wells had knowingly participated in the robbery plot, although they also believed he didn't expect the bomb to be real or to actually kill him. Several co-conspirators were later convicted, making the collar bomb case one of America's strangest botched robberies. Morbidly Obese Facts, Part 1. In 2004, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years, to the point where her skin completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail and her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. Studies have shown that obese drivers are 80% more likely to die in a car accident than drivers who are not overweight. John Brower Minock was the heaviest person ever reliably recorded, with doctors estimating his peak weight at around 1,400 pounds. After being hospitalized, he was placed on a strict 1,200 calorie per day diet, and over the next 2 years lost an astonishing 924 pounds, the largest documented human weight loss in history. But unfortunately, after leaving the hospital, he gradually regained most of the weight back. He was eventually readmitted after weighing about 950 pounds and died in 1983 at the age of 41. Here's some insane footage of a 600-pound Florida man being rescued from his apartment after suffering from a sudden medical emergency. Because he couldn't be safely carried through the building's doors or stairways, firefighters had to remove part of his exterior wall instead. They strapped him onto a heavy-duty shipping pallet, attached it to a crane, and slowly lowered him from the apartment as neighbors gathered outside to watch. The painstaking rescue took a large team of emergency responders and specialized equipment just to get him into an ambulance. In the past few decades, some morbidly obese patients have been sent to zoos for MRI and CT scans because standard hospital machines can't accommodate their weight. Zoos have bigger scanners designed for large animals, making them a practical solution in these extreme cases. In July of 2024, 24-year-old Chinese mukbang streamer Pan Xiaoting died after collapsing during a marathon eating live stream. Despite previously being hospitalized for gastrointestinal bleeding, she reportedly continued doing 10-hour binge-eating broadcasts, consuming up to 22 pounds of food in a single session. Her autopsy report said her stomach was severely deformed and still packed with undigested food, with many outlets reporting she likely suffered a fatal stomach rupture following the extreme binge. Just before the 2015 NFL season, Giants defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul severely injured his right hand when a powerful firework exploded prematurely. The blast shattered multiple bones, caused extensive burns, and forced doctors to amputate some of his fingers. But despite the life-changing injury, he returned to the NFL and later won a Super Bowl title with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In 2015, 22-year-old former Disney World performer Devin Staples, who had previously played Gaston and Goofy at the park, was celebrating the 4th of July with some friends when he attempted to launch a fireworks mortar from the top of his head. The shell exploded instantly, killing him at the scene. His family later said he wasn't trying to do something reckless. He was only pretending to as a joke when the fireworks unexpectedly ignited. This was the moment a single explosion turned Mexico's largest fireworks market into a war zone. The 2016 blast ignited hundreds of tons of fireworks at the San Poblito market in Tultepec, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that leveled most of the market within seconds. At least 42 people were killed and nearly 100 more were injured, with many victims suffering catastrophic burns. Homes surrounding the market were heavily damaged, and several children required treatment for burns covering 90% of their bodies. Despite the disaster, the market was eventually rebuilt, even though Tultepec had already experienced multiple deadly fire explosions in previous years. This was the moment San Diego's 2012 Big Bay Boom fireworks show went catastrophically wrong. The 4th of July display was supposed to last 18 minutes, but a computer glitch triggered all 7,000 shells at once, turning the entire show into a deafening and blinding 25-second barrage of explosions. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. Investigators later traced the error to a software failure, and the fireworks company accepted full responsibility before providing the following year's $125,000 show free of charge. Exactly 50 years after the United States declared its independence, on July 4, 1826, President John Adams lay dying and uttered his final words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But little did he know, President Thomas Jefferson had died a few hours earlier that same day, making them the first two U.S. presidents to die on the nation's birthday. 5 years later, President James Monroe also died on July 4th, becoming the third president out of the first 5 to die on Independence Day. When President James Madison was nearing death 5 years after that, his doctors did everything to keep him alive until the 4th of July, but Madison refused to be unnecessarily stimulated. He died naturally on June 28th, just 6 days before Independence Day, ending the incredible streak. In 2015, 32-year-old Jonathan Buckaloo visited a chiropractor in Georgia for a routine neck adjustment when he suddenly suffered a vertebral artery dissection, triggering a catastrophic brainstem stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite showing classic signs of a stroke, doctors allegedly failed to diagnose him for more than 12 hours. By the time treatment finally began, the damage was irreversible. Buckaloo was left with locked-in syndrome, a rare condition in which a person is fully conscious but almost completely paralyzed, unable to move, speak, eat, or breathe on their own, with communication limited to only slight eye movements. He now requires around-the-clock care for virtually every aspect of his daily life. A jury eventually awarded him $75 million, finding that the hospital's delayed diagnosis and treatment caused his permanent disability. The chiropractor was found not liable after calling 911 immediately after Buckaloo collapsed, and the claims against him were later dismissed. Once one of Britain's biggest television stars thanks to her role on EastEnders, Daniela Westbrook's life was completely derailed by a severe cocaine addiction. She later admitted to using staggering amounts of the drug at the peak of her addiction, spending around $400 daily and using up to 5 grams a day. Years of abuse destroyed much of her nasal septum, causing part of her nose to collapse and requiring numerous reconstructive surgeries. She's also survived uterine cancer, sepsis, facial fractures, and repeated relapses, with her appearance becoming one of the most striking examples of the effects of long-term cocaine abuse. Between 1974 and 1975, an unidentified serial killer known as the Doodler stalked gay nightclubs across San Francisco, where he sketched men before luring them to secluded areas and stabbing them to death. Investigators believe he murdered at least 5 men, while 3 other victims survived. Police reportedly identified a prime suspect, but the surviving victims refused to testify because they were afraid to publicly come out as gay, and the case remains unsolved more than 50 years later. Tiny Tim became an overnight sensation in the late 1960s with his falsetto rendition of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, but his fame faded almost as quickly as it arrived. Financial problems forced him to continue performing despite suffering from severe heart disease. In September of 1996, he suffered a heart attack after a concert but ignored doctors' warnings to stop performing. Just 2 months later, he collapsed on stage during another performance, suffered another massive heart attack, and died the following day. Here's some footage of one of nature's most gruesome mating rituals. Male honeybees, known as drones, die immediately after mating when the reproductive organ is ripped from their body, tearing open their abdomen and killing them within seconds. During her only mating flight, a queen typically mates with 10 to 20 drones, though some mate with 40 or more, storing enough sperm to fertilize eggs for the rest of her life. In 1859, English settler Thomas Austin released just 24 European rabbits into the Australian wilderness to hunt them for sport. But with few natural predators and ideal conditions, the population exploded into billions within decades, devastating native ecosystems, stripping vegetation, causing massive soil erosion, and becoming one of the worst invasive species disasters in history. Morbid facts. Connor Murphy rose to fame as one of YouTube's biggest fitness influencers, amassing millions of followers through bodybuilding videos, pranks, and physique transformations. However, beginning around 2020, his content became increasingly erratic, featuring bizarre spiritual claims, extreme fasting experiments, psychedelic usage, and multiple psychiatric hospitalizations that alarmed many longtime fans. On July 7, 2026, police in Thailand responded to reports that the 32-year-old American was acting strangely outside the luxury lakeside home he'd been renting with his girlfriend. Witnesses said he was shouting, rolling on the ground, attempting to get into passing vehicles, and making prayer-like gestures before fleeing from responding officers by running into a nearby lake. He continued swimming until he became exhausted and soon disappeared beneath the surface. Rescue divers recovered his body 30 minutes later from roughly 66 feet offshore. Investigators reported no signs of foul play, but found 2 unused syringes and several unidentified pills among his belongings, while his rental home had reportedly been left splattered with paint and extensively damaged in the hours before his death. An autopsy and toxicology tests are now underway to determine exactly what led to the tragic outburst and drowning. Here's some amazing footage of one of the rarest birds on Earth coming face to face with another of its own kind. This is the kagu, a bird found only on the island of New Caledonia, where fewer than 2,000 of them are believed to remain in the wild. Unlike most birds, kagus can barely fly, instead relying on dramatic crest displays and synchronized dances like this to communicate, defend territory, and strengthen pair bonds. Conservation efforts have helped bring the species back from the brink of extinction, making sightings like this possible once again. Here's a clip of what's believed to be the largest gathering of orcas ever filmed. The incredible scene was captured by Tony Meyer off the coast of northern Norway, where hundreds of killer whales converge to feed on massive schools of herring. Rather than hunting alone, the orcas worked together to herd the fish into massive bait balls before taking turns feeding, creating one of the most spectacular predator gatherings ever recorded. Despite being apex predators capable of taking down great white sharks and even other whales, there are no confirmed cases of wild orcas intentionally killing a human. The only fatal orca attacks on humans have happened in 2012. An Icelandic TV station accidentally aired an episode of the Teletubbies with subtitles from HBO's The Sopranos, leaving children watching cheerful characters while captions referenced murder, dead dogs, drugs, and impotence. The bizarre mix-up was spotted by an adult viewer who photographed the screen before the broadcast ended. Just months later, the channel shut down completely and its archives were destroyed, meaning the original footage is believed to have disappeared forever. Today, only a few blurry photos remain as evidence that the surreal broadcast ever happened. Just 7 days after being released from prison, Aaron Tucker had less than $2 to his name and was on his way to a life-changing job interview when he watched a car flip over and begin filling with smoke. Knowing the bus would leave without him and he'd miss the interview, he ran off anyway, pulled the badly injured 61-year-old driver from the wreck moments before it caught fire, and used his own dress shirt to stop the man's bleeding. Tucker missed the interview but saved the stranger's life, and after his story went viral, donations topped $50,000 within days, and employers lined up to offer him a second chance. Country singer Mindy McCready shot to fame after her 1996 debut album 10,000 Angels sold over 2 million copies, but then her life quickly spiraled into years of addiction, abusive relationships, legal troubles, and mental health crisis. In January of 2013, her longtime boyfriend died by suicide in the Arkansas home they shared, leaving her completely devastated. Just 2 weeks later, she lost custody of her 2 young sons. Just days later, after killing the family's dog, McCready died by suicide at just 37 years old, ending one of country music's most tragic and heartbreaking stories. Lisa Reed had been completely blind for 13 years after a childhood tumor damaged her optic nerve, relying on a guide dog to navigate everyday life. But one night in November of 2000, she accidentally banged her head on a coffee table while trying to bend down to kiss her guide dog goodnight, then woke up the next morning able to see again. Doctors confirmed she'd regained about 80% of her vision in one eye, but could offer no medical explanation, calling it a miracle unlike anything they'd ever seen. One of the most emotional moments came when she saw her younger brother for the first time since he was a child, telling him in amazement, "My brother's a man," before later sharing her extraordinary story in her memoir, Angel Eyes. Serial killer Richard Ramirez spent nearly 24 years on California's death row before dying in 2013 from complications of B-cell lymphoma at age 53, never having been executed. In the weeks before his death, advanced liver failure reportedly turned his skin a vivid green, with several prison sources claiming he looked like a green highlighter pen. Despite being sentenced to death in 1989 for 13 murders and various other violent crimes, he died of natural causes while still awaiting execution. This box contains hundreds of knee replacements that outlived the people they were implanted in. During cremation, the human body is reduced to ashes, but artificial joints survive the furnace intact. They're removed afterward, collected like this, and often recycled into new products, with many crematories donating the proceeds to charitable causes. Poker champion Victoria Coren Mitchell once sought therapy to overcome her fear of flying, but in a cruel twist of fate, her therapist was later killed in a plane crash. The tragedy reinforced her long-standing phobia rather than curing it, and she's avoided flying ever since, often traveling by train or boat instead. Here's a photo of one of the deadliest wild animals on Earth. Known as Dorbay, the rogue bull elephant has been linked to at least 25 human deaths in Nepal since 2010. In 2012, he trampled a husband and wife to death near Chitwan National Park, forcing his devastated son to move nearly 9 miles away across 2 rivers in hope that they'd never cross paths with him again. But 14 years later, Dorbay found them, raiding their home and killing the man's 25-year-old daughter-in-law and 4-year-old grandson, bringing the same family's death toll up to 4. The attacks have unfolded amid a growing human-elephant conflict, as shrinking habitat and growing villages have pushed elephants into closer contact with people. Despite being shot, fitted with multiple tracking collars, and closely monitored for years, Dorbay remains alive, and the surviving father now says, "There's nowhere left for us to run." Here's some terrifying footage from one of the most horrific flood disasters imaginable. After catastrophic flooding struck southern China in July of 2026, a snake breeding farm was destroyed, releasing about 900 snakes, including venomous cobras and kraits, into nearby villages. As residents waded through chest-deep floodwater, authorities warned that deadly snakes could be hiding just beneath the surface. Hospitals rushed to stock with antivenom, emergency teams were deployed to hunt the escaped reptiles, and several people were reportedly bitten while clearing flood debris. The flooding itself killed at least 39 people and forced 130,000 residents to evacuate. Erling Haaland spent roughly $134,000 to buy the only surviving copy of a rare 1594 edition of Heimskringla, one of Norway's oldest printed history books, preventing the 430-year-old volume from disappearing into a private collection. Instead, he donated it to the library in his hometown of Bryn, where it will be preserved and put on public display permanently so future generations can see one of the country's rarest surviving historical treasures. These tiny stone stars are actually prehistoric fossils. They're the preserved stem segments of sea lilies, marine animals called crinoids that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. When the stems broke apart, they left behind these perfectly star-shaped fossils. This child's robe, made in China over 150 years ago during the Qing dynasty, was known as a 100-family robe. Families throughout a village each donated a small patch of fabric, with every piece symbolizing protection, blessings, and good fortune. So the child quite literally wore the support of the entire community. This massive Olmec stone head lay buried beneath the jungle for centuries until archaeologists uncovered it in the 1950s at San Lorenzo, Mexico. Weighing up to 20 tons, these colossal stone heads were carved over 3,000 years ago and hauled for miles without wheels or animals. To this day, no one knows exactly how the Olmec moved them or why so many of them were deliberately. If you ever see this in the wild, you're already in big trouble. Caught on a trail cam, this video shows a skunk performing one of nature's most unmistakable incredible warning displays. Before spraying, skunks often stomp their feet, hiss, raise their tail into a massive plume, and may even stand on their front legs in a final attempt to intimidate predators and avoid wasting their spray. If these warnings are ignored, they can accurately spray a foul-smelling liquid up to 15 feet, temporarily blind anything that gets it in its eyes, and leave an overpowering odor that can linger for days. Kimbo Slice rose from viral backyard street fights to become one of the most recognizable names in combat sports, turning his YouTube fame into careers in MMA, boxing, and the UFC. But just months after his final fight, he was rushed to a Florida hospital, suffering from severe abdominal pain, nausea, and shortness of breath. Doctors discovered his body was completely shutting down. He was in advanced congestive heart failure, his kidneys had failed bad enough to require dialysis, and a mass had been found on his liver. Although no official cause was announced for why his health had deteriorated so rapidly, he was placed on the waiting list for an emergency heart transplant. Just 3 days after being admitted, Kimbo died at the age of 42, leaving behind 6 children. After becoming an international superstar with her 1990 hit Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor's career became overshadowed by controversy following her infamous 1992 appearance on Saturday Night Live, where she tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II to protest child abuse within the Catholic Church. She was widely criticized at the time, and the backlash permanently damaged her career. Over the following decades, she spoke openly about living with mental illness, struggled with periods of severe depression, and faced repeated personal hardships. In 2022, her 17-year-old son died by suicide after going missing, a tragedy she described as completely devastating. Just over a year later, in 2023, O'Connor was found dead in her London apartment at the age of 56. A coroner later determined she had died of natural causes. This 1982 photograph captured 18-year-old Patty Gifford celebrating New Year's Eve in Fort Lauderdale just hours before she would disappear forever. The man standing behind her was 22-year-old Dennis Sokor, who prosecutors said kidnapped, raped, and strangled her after she rejected his sexual advances later that night. Patty's friend unknowingly photographed him in the background, creating the image that ultimately helped investigators identify her killer after he fled the state. Sokor later confessed to the murder, though he never revealed where he dumped her body, leaving Patty's family without a grave for more than 4 decades. Her boyfriend never married, hoping she'd one day be found so they could be buried together, but he died in 2020 before that wish could be fulfilled. On July 14, 2026, after spending nearly 40 years on Florida's death row, Sokor was executed, apologizing for his crimes in his final statement, while Patty's remains are still missing. A deformed raccoon named Jimothy has gone viral after roaming Seattle with what experts believe to be short spine syndrome, a rare congenital condition that severely compresses the spine. Animals born with the disorder often struggle to survive in the wild because reduced mobility can make it harder to escape predators, find food, climb trees, and compete with healthier animals, with many never reaching adulthood. Despite those overwhelming odds, Jimothy appears remarkably healthy and agile, but every day in the wild remains a fight for survival, making him an unlikely symbol of resilience. This photo shows soccer legend Diego Maradona wearing a no-drugs jersey in 1993 after returning from a 15-month suspension for testing positive for cocaine. By then, his addiction had already destroyed his legendary career at Napoli, led to a police raid on his home, and resulted in his arrest for drug possession. Just a year later, he was expelled from the 1994 World Cup after another failed drug test, ending his international career, and a third failed test in 1997 brought his playing career to a humiliating close. Even after retiring, his health only continued to collapse. He suffered a cocaine-related heart attack in 2000, was hospitalized with severe hepatitis in 2004, and endured multiple life-threatening medical emergencies before dying of heart failure in 2020, just weeks after brain surgery, with prosecutors later claiming negligent medical care contributed to his death. Here's a photo of an elephant doing something scientists once thought was impossible. Using its tusks like pickaxes, it chips away at solid rock deep inside a cave. These Kenyan cave elephants squeeze through impossibly narrow passages, gradually carving out caves that can stretch for miles. But they're not looking for shelter, they're mining cave walls for mineral-rich salt, an essential nutrient that's scarce in their rainforest habitat. Generation after generation has followed the same underground routes, creating one of the animal kingdom's most extraordinary examples of natural mining. This is what it looks like when a hedgehog gets x-rayed. Hedgehogs instinctively curl into a tight, spiny ball when frightened, making it nearly impossible for veterinarians to get a clear x-ray. To safely examine them, vets sometimes gently tape their tiny legs to the x-ray plate so they can check for broken bones, swallowed objects, or other internal injuries. This photo shows an East German Stasi agent photographing a CIA agent at the exact moment the CIA agent was photographing him. During the Cold War, both sides constantly tracked and identified each other's spies, turning surveillance into a bizarre game of mutual espionage where no one was ever truly invisible. Despite suffering from stomach cancer, Raul Julia accepted the role of M. Bison in the 1994 Street Fighter movie because his children were huge fans of the games and wanted to see their father play the villain. He pushed through filming while seriously ill, then suffered a stroke and died aged 54 in 1994, just days before the movie made it to theaters. Just a few weeks before earning her college degree, Sherilyn Kahelig was killed in a car accident. At her graduation, her grieving father carried a life-size cardboard cutout of her through the ceremony and accepted her diploma on her behalf. Sherilyn had dreamed of graduating so she could lift her family out of poverty, and her younger brother has vowed to carry on that dream in her honor. In September of 1975, Marine veteran Oliver Sipple grabbed the arm of a woman as she pointed a loaded revolver at President Gerald Ford, causing her assassination attempt to fail by mere inches. But instead of becoming known as the man who saved a president, Sipple was involuntarily outed as gay as activists in the media publicized his sexuality, leading to a permanent estrangement from much of his family. He struggled with severe depression, alcoholism, and isolation for years afterward, and died alone in his San Francisco apartment in 1989 at just 47 years old, his body reportedly not being discovered for nearly 2 weeks. In 2008, 2 high school dropouts from Calabasas discovered Paris Hilton kept a spare key under her doormat and burglarized her $6 million mansion 5 separate times before she even realized anything was missing. Their group, later dubbed the Bling Ring, targeted celebrities they tracked through gossip websites and social media, ultimately stealing an estimated $3 million worth of cash, jewelry, designer clothing, and luxury watches from stars including Lindsay Lohan, Orlando Bloom, and Megan Fox before police finally unraveled the spree and arrested the crew. Between 2011 and 2012, a group of thieves pulled off one of the strangest heists in Canadian history, stealing nearly 3,000 tons of maple syrup worth over $18 million from a warehouse in Quebec. They siphoned the syrup out of the official barrels belonging to the province's maple syrup reserve and quietly refilled them with water to hide the theft. The scheme went unnoticed for months until a routine inspection revealed the barrels were suspiciously light. The investigation led to multiple arrests and exposed a black market syrup operation that was much bigger than anyone could have ever expected. This was the mask found in the home of Edward Paisnell, the serial predator known as the Beast of Jersey, who spent more than a decade terrorizing the British island of Jersey by breaking into homes late at night wearing disguises to brutally assault women and children physically and sexually. By the time he was arrested in 1971, investigators linked him to at least 13 attacks spanning 11 years. Paisnell was eventually sentenced to 30 years in prison and died in 1994. These remains belong to a man executed by the breaking wheel, a form of capital punishment used in Europe between the 16th and 18th centuries. The condemned was tied to a wheel while an executioner deliberately broke the major bones of the body one by one, usually starting with the legs and moving upward. Death was often delayed, sometimes lasting hours or even days. After execution, the body was woven through the wheel and displayed in public, left exposed to weather and animals as a warning. Discovered in Austria in 2014, this skeleton shows injuries consistent with the method and provides rare physical evidence of one of history's most horrific executions. After Christopher Reeve was thrown from his horse in 1995 and paralyzed from his shoulders down, he told his wife Dana from his hospital bed that she should take their son and move on because she hadn't signed up for a life like this. But she simply replied to him, "You're still you, and I love you." Reeve later said that was the moment he realized he wanted to keep living. Dana gave up her acting and singing career to become his full-time caretaker and remained by his side until his death in 2004 at age 52. Then just 17 months later, Dana died of lung cancer at 44 years old despite never having smoked, leaving their 13-year-old son Will without either parent. Lucy Humphrey was told she only had a few years left to live after kidney failure caused by lupus. But during a beach trip in 2021, her Doberman Indy kept running over to a stranger named Katie James, sparking a conversation that eventually led to Katie volunteering to be tested as a donor. She turned out to be a perfect kidney match, with doctors saying the odds of finding someone with such a closely matched blood type and tissue profile were about 1 in 22 million. Katie donated one of her kidneys in 2022, giving Lucy a second chance at life, and later called it the best thing I've ever done. This woman lived an entire second life, then woke up. In June of 2025, 19-year-old Clélia Verdier of France was placed into a medically induced coma after an overdose on medication. But inside her mind, those 21 days became 7 full years. She fell in love, got married, endured the vivid pain of childbirth, and gave birth to triplets named Mila, Miles, and Miley. She said the experience was completely indistinguishable from reality, remembering everything from family vacations and bedtime routines to the heartbreak of losing one of her babies shortly after birth. To her, there was never a moment where it felt like a dream. She believed it was simply her life. When she woke up, her first question was where her children were, before doctors explained the family she had spent 7 years loving had never existed. More than a year later, she says she still mourns the family she vividly remembers, and still feels like their mother despite knowing they only existed in her subconscious. In 2001, 28-year-old physician Andrew Bagby ended his relationship with his girlfriend, Dr. Shirley Turner, after becoming convinced she was unstable and fearing for his own safety. Days later, Turner lured him to a Pennsylvania park under the pretense of talking, then shot him 5 times before leaving his body in the woods. After fleeing to Canada, Turner announced she was pregnant with Andrew's son, Zachary. Despite being charged with Andrew's murder, she was repeatedly granted bail, allowing her to keep custody of the baby while Andrew's grieving parents spent over a year trying to fight the courts to protect him. On August 18, 2003, just days after a judge ruled that Zachary should be placed in his grandparents' care, Turner sedated the 13-month-old with drugs, strapped him to her body, and took both of their lives. A public inquiry later concluded that Zachary's death was preventable, and that authorities had repeatedly ignored clear warning signs. The case later led to child protection reforms in Canada known as Zachary's Bill. Andrew's best friend had originally begun filming a documentary so that Zachary would one day know how great of a person his father was. But after Zachary was tragically killed, the project transformed into Dear Zachary, a devastating true crime documentary chronicling one of the most heartbreaking murder cases. California nurse Diana Sanders was served at least 14 tequila shots over an 8.5-hour period during a Carnival cruise before blacking out and falling down a staircase. She suffered a concussion, a possible traumatic brain injury, chronic headaches, neck, back, and tailbone injuries, along with extensive bruising that she said left her unable to work for months. A federal jury later found Carnival responsible for over-serving her alcohol and awarded Sanders $300,000 in damages. Carnival has said it plans to appeal. According to researchers, wild animals are twice as likely to flee from the sound of calm human conversations as compared to the growls of lions. In South Africa's Greater Kruger National Park, scientists played recordings of calm human voices, hunting sounds, lion growls, and the sounds of other animals at watering holes. They found that 95% of the 19 mammal species tested, including elephants, giraffes, leopards, hyenas, zebras, and warthogs, showed much stronger fear responses to humans than to their natural predators, often fleeing more quickly and staying away for longer. The findings reinforce scientists' description of humans as Earth's ultimate super predators. Mako Nishimura is widely regarded as the only woman ever formally accepted as a full member of Japan's traditionally male-dominated Yakuza. After earning a reputation for such extreme violence that a Yakuza boss personally recruited her, she spent over 30 years overseeing prostitution, drug trafficking, and brutal debt collection. She eventually became known as the Mistress of Finger Cutting for carrying out the ritual amputations required of members who broke the gang's code. After leaving the Yakuza, she dedicated her life to helping former gang members escape organized crime, find jobs, reconnect with their families, and build new lives outside of the underworld. In 1989, Rudy Linares held hospital staff at gunpoint before disconnecting his 15-month-old son Samuel's life support and cradling the boy as he died. Samuel had suffered irreversible brain damage after choking on a balloon months earlier, and although doctors agreed he would never recover, Illinois law prevented them from removing the ventilator because he was not legally brain dead. Linares was initially charged with murder, but a grand jury refused to indict him, and he ultimately pleaded guilty only to unlawful use of a weapon. Here's an incredible photo of one of the rarest wild animals in the United States, a wild jaguar captured on a trail cam in southern Arizona. Jaguars once roamed from California to Louisiana, but hunting and habitat loss over the years eliminated them from the U.S. by the mid-20th century. Now, after decades of absence, a small number of wild males have begun returning from Mexico, giving scientists hope the species may be reclaiming part of its historic range. There are still no known breeding females in the United States, so every trail cam photo is considered an extremely rare glimpse of America's largest native cat. This picture was accidentally left behind by a woman who helped build the first iPhones. In 2008, a Foxconn factory worker forgot to delete her camera's test photos before the phone was shipped off to a customer in Britain. After he posted them online, the smiling worker became an instant internet sensation known simply as iPhone Girl. Here's a photo of a nuclear explosion less than 1 millisecond after detonation. At this moment, the fireball was only about 66 feet across, but already millions of degrees, roughly 3 times hotter than the surface of the sun. The spikes hanging beneath it are steel support cables being instantly vaporized into glowing plasma. The image was captured in 1952 using an ultra-high-speed camera, revealing the first moments of a nuclear explosion in a way the human eye never could. This is some of the final footage of Harry R. Truman after he refused to evacuate Mount St. Helens. Truman was an 83-year-old lodge owner who insisted they'll never get me off this mountain, despite weeks of earthquakes and warnings that the volcano was on the verge of erupting. His wife had died years earlier and was buried on the property, and Truman said he wanted to be buried beside her. He also refused to leave behind his 16 beloved cats, believing that if he stayed to care for them, they would survive alongside him. As reporters flocked to interview him, he became a national symbol of defiance, declaring that the mountain had been his home for decades and that he would rather die there than abandon it. On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted, triggering the largest landslide ever recorded and a devastating lateral blast that buried his lodge beneath hundreds of feet of rock, ash, and debris. Neither Truman nor his cats were ever found or recovered, as they're believed to remain eternally entombed beneath the mountain. In 1936, Tokyo waitress Sada Abe began a passionate relationship with her married employer Kichizo Ishida, and the two spent weeks isolated in various hotels, refusing to leave each other's side. As their relationship became increasingly obsessive, they began incorporating erotic asphyxiation into intercourse, with Ishida repeatedly asking Abe to tighten an obi sash around his neck because he believed it intensified his pleasure. But during one encounter, she decided to strangle him to death, then severed his package and pearls, his twig and berries, his scepter and crown, his banana and clementines, his dick and balls, wrote Sada Kichi together in his blood on his thigh, and spent the next day casually shopping and going to the movies while carrying his organs in her kimono. She later told police she killed him because she loved him so deeply that she couldn't bear the thought of another woman ever touching him again. Sentenced to 6 years in prison, she was released after 5, disappeared without a trace in 1970, and her ultimate fate remains one of Japan's most enduring mysteries. Cosplayer Mary Ann Oliver Snow, aka Yandere Freak, had built an online audience of more than 1.6 million followers before a single mistake changed everything. During a night of drinking with friends in 2021, she handled a handgun that she believed was unloaded after removing the magazine. When her friend Hannah Rose Hastings jokingly said, "Shoot me," Mary Ann pointed the gun at her and pulled the trigger, unaware a live round was still in the chamber. Helen was killed instantly. Mary Ann was charged with manslaughter, but later reached a plea deal that allowed her to avoid prison time. Instead, she was sentenced to 10 years of probation. Prosecutors allege Los Angeles man Raheem Powell used this incredibly lifelike silicone mask to disguise himself as a white man while using dating apps to lure gay men to isolated locations. He's accused of murdering one man in 2021, is charged in the connection of another man who disappeared in 2023, whose car was later found in Powell's garage, and allegedly kidnapped, robbed, and ran over a third victim who survived and later identified him to police. Investigators say the realistic mask allowed Powell to hide his identity in plain sight, and he now faces multiple murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and robbery charges. Former Korean model Hong Myoku became addicted to cosmetic surgery, undergoing numerous silicone injections until surgeons refused to perform any more because her face had become dangerously swollen. But unable to stop, she began injecting herself with black market silicone and eventually even cooking oil, causing massive inflammation, permanent tissue damage, and severe facial disfigurement. Doctors later removed massive amounts of silicone, oil, scar tissue, and damaged skin through multiple reconstructive surgeries, but the damage was irreversible. After a severe electrical shock destroyed 99% of a man's nose, Iraqi plastic surgeon Dr. Dr. Abdulwahid reconstructed it by implanting cartilage beneath the skin of the patient's forehead, where it developed a healthy blood supply and gradually grew into the shape of a new nose. Weeks later, surgeons transferred the tissue to the center of his nose and sculpted it into a functioning nose. The procedure gave the patient a chance to regain both his appearance and the ability to breathe normally again after a horrific injury that left him almost completely without a nose. In November of 2020, 80-year-old Paulette Landreau, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, suddenly disappeared from her home in Belgium. Despite helicopters, thermal cams, tracking dogs, and massive search efforts, she seemed to vanish without a trace. But 2 years later, a Google Street View image taken on the day she disappeared was discovered showing her walking toward a neighboring property. Police retraced her final steps and found her remains hidden beneath dense shrubs at the bottom of a steep embankment just yards from where she was last seen. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, concluding she had most likely suffered a fatal accidental fall. In 2017, 16-year-old Davis Allen Kripe suddenly collapsed and died after drinking a large caffeinated latte, a Mountain Dew, and 2 energy drinks within 2 hours. According to the coroner, the rapid caffeine intake triggered a fatal heart rhythm disturbance. Although the total caffeine wasn't considered unusually high for an adult, officials said drinking it all within such a short period completely overwhelmed his body. In 886, Byzantine Emperor Basil I was hunting when his belt suddenly became tangled in a stag's antlers, causing the terrified animal to drag him roughly 16 miles through the wilderness. By the time he was finally freed, he had suffered catastrophic internal injuries, broken bones, and severe trauma across most of his body. Basil lingered in agony for several days before finally dying from his injury. Before becoming one of Hollywood's toughest actors, Jon Bernthal spent years getting into violent street fights, was arrested multiple times, and later admitted he was headed down roads he shouldn't have survived. In 2009, while walking his dog, he punched a man during a confrontation, knocking him unconscious after the man's head struck the pavement. Handcuffed to a police station bench, Bernthal was told that if the victim died, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. The man ultimately survived, but Bernthal said the incident permanently changed him, leading him to abandon violence and channel that side of himself into acting instead. He's since revealed his nose has been broken about 15 times from a lifetime of fights and physically demanding roles. In 2019, Zhao Jingqian fell headfirst from a warehouse roof while rescuing a trapped toddler, using his own body to absorb the impact and save the child's life. After briefly waking from a CT scan to ask, "Is the child okay?" he slipped back into a coma with severe brain damage. His wife, Song Mei, quit her job to care for him full-time, and after doctors suggested stimulating his feet, she began biting his toes every day for nearly 7 years after noticing it triggered a response. In June 2026, Zhao finally turned to her and whispered, "Song Mei, I love you." During writing therapy, the only word he can currently write is her name. In 2025, 32-year-old Sonia Exelby traveled alone from the United Kingdom to Florida after allegedly paying 53-year-old Dwayne Hall $4,000 to sexually abuse, torture, and ultimately kill her. Investigators say Hall purchased rope, paracord, a shovel, and other supplies shortly before picking her up at the Gainesville airport. Sonia had reportedly attempted a similar trip the year before, but it had been stopped before she could follow through. This time, however, messages she allegedly sent after meeting Hall suggested the reality was far worse than she expected. She was frightened, in severe pain, and appeared to no longer want what was happening to her. Despite this, prosecutors allege Hall continued holding and abusing her before stabbing her to death and burying her body in a shallow grave in a wooded area. Her remains were discovered about a week later. Hall was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping and is awaiting trial. On August 4th, 2026, celebrity blogger Perez Hilton was hospitalized after live streaming an apparent mental health crisis from his South Florida home. During the disturbing broadcast, Hilton appeared completely covered in blood and seemingly harmed himself as horrified viewers contacted authorities, while TikTok also reportedly alerted police after detecting the live stream. Even more disturbing, Hilton's 3 children had reportedly been inside the home shortly before the crisis. His sister and niece realized something was seriously wrong and fled with the children only minutes before the live stream began. Police arrived around 7 p.m., but rather than immediately entering the home, spent nearly 4 hours attempting to de-escalate the situation out of concern that a confrontation could potentially provoke a suicide by cops scenario. Hilton was eventually taken to a hospital and placed under Florida's Baker Act for psychiatric evaluation. The incident followed an already brutal year for the famous blogger. Months earlier, Perez spent 21 days hospitalized after a perforated ulcer led to severe sepsis, and soon afterward, doctors discovered a massive blood clot in his leg requiring emergency surgery. A few weeks before the live stream, Hilton also publicly admitted he was in a spiral and felt overwhelmed after moving back to Miami, a city he's reportedly associated with traumatic memories, including witnessing his father and grandfather dying just a week apart when he was younger. As of the latest update, Hilton remains hospitalized and receiving treatment, with his family saying he's safe, able to communicate, and surrounded by loved ones, while asking the public to respect his privacy as he recovered. Before the hangover made him famous, a struggling Zach Galifianakis befriended Mimi Haste, a homeless laundromat attendant who'd been living at the laundromat for years after her marriage ended. After finding success, Zach quietly rented her an apartment, helped furnish it with the help of actress Renee Zellweger, and regularly brought Mimi as his date to Hollywood premieres. Their unlikely friendship became the subject of the 2015 documentary Queen Mimi. Mimi died in 2021 at age 96, having spent her final years surrounded by friends who helped change her life. Some of Michael Jackson's most iconic dance moves were likely inspired by Bob Fosse. Throughout the 1974 film The Little Prince, Fosse performs movements that look strangely familiar. Sliding footwork, sharp kicks, hip isolations, sudden poses, and his signature use of a black hat. Jackson was a known admirer of Fosse, and years later, many of these same mannerisms became staples of Michael's performances. Jackson combined them with influences from James Brown, Fred Astaire, and street dancers to create a style that became unmistakably his own. Some of Tom Holland's darkest experiences have happened both on and off screen. His breakout role came in The Impossible, based on a family that survived the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 225,000 people across 14 countries. 7-year-old Holland met the real family and heard firsthand what they endured. Years later, he starred in The Crowded Room as a mental case inspired partly by Billy Milligan, who claimed to have 24 different personalities, and became the first person acquitted of major crimes in the U.S. due to dissociative identity disorder. Holland said the psychologically intense role left him so emotionally drained that he took a year off from acting. Around the same period, he was confronting his own dark relationship with alcohol. After attempting Dry January in 2022, Holland realized he was constantly thinking about alcohol, struggled to socialize without it, and felt he needed to drink to relax after stressful days on set. He became concerned by just how difficult it was to stop, later admitting, "I was definitely addicted to alcohol." Holland eventually pushed himself to stay sober for 6 months, saying he became noticeably happier, healthier, and better able to handle problems. He ultimately quit drinking altogether and has remained sober ever since.